Writing individualized ABA programming was not necessarily included in the ABA theory and principles that we learned at school. Once we have the assessments complete, how do we make sure that we choose meaningful programs that include teaching across operants for optimal success?
Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna.
We are behavior analysts who create weekly content about how to teach kids with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about individualized ABA programming. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
So when I think about individualizing something, I think about driving. When I get into my seat for driving is set up for me, and I can jump in and I can go. But if someone else has been driving my car, I have to go back and I've got to individualize my seat again. Or if I'm jumping in someone else's car, I may or may not be able to reach the pedals. And if I can, the mirrors aren't set up properly. So even though a car is a car, the driver's seat is the driver's seat, you still have to individualize it so that you can get in and drive effectively.
So, a lot of the things that we learned in school that we were trained on to become BCBA, BACB certified gave us a lot of good foundation and principles of ABA and a lot of, textbook type stuff and terminology and all that stuff that's really important. But at least for me, I found it was never really covered on how to create programs. A lot of us end up teaching kids with autism. Obviously the certification is not exclusive to this niche, but a lot of us end up in it and find ourselves now in supervision or post supervision and not really knowing how to choose programs after an assessment and write them so that students make real progress.
I was an ABA therapist before I was a BCBA, and that gave me a lot of really great background. But I knew how to implement programs, but I didn't know which ones came first and then which ones followed and why, we did this one and not this one, or how we taught and everything else. And that didn't get learned until afterwards. And, we learned how to use assessment tools. And then you look at the assessment and you go, oh, well, there's blank boxes. Maybe I can just put those in and I can have a program and that can be that. The problem with that, though, is that things become cookie cutter. Then all of a sudden you're not looking at a student as a student, you're looking at a student as, well, an empty box on assessment that needs to be filled in, which isn't awesome. So we really need to do an assessment, but then be able to look at that and look at our students and say, well, what are the functional goals they need based on the assessment? And what are their likes and dislikes? And then be able to put that into a functional program.
Right. The assessments that we use were never intended to be curriculum. They are meant to give us, a picture of the student's skills and a continued picture as they progress through the program. But then we have to use our clinical judgment in taking a step back and looking at the full picture of this student, this individual, this young adult, or whoever this is, and think about what are the skills that they need? What are some challenges that they have? What would be really meaningful to the family? To be taught to this learner, and then think about how to implement that in a way that teachers across operants, that's dynamic, that doesn't promote memorization or rote learning, and you won't get that from the boxes on an assessment.
So many times, like I said, if you're filling in a box of an assessment, you're like, oh, this box in the intraverbal section isn't filled in. I better do that one. And then all of a sudden you've got kids who are memorizing, what has wings, an airplane, what has, I don't know, a tail, a fish, what has, what swims, a fish. I keep saying a fish, a fish, a fish. But, that's memorized. And then all of a sudden, kids, will have their, 20th question, and they can spit out the answer, but then they forget the first few because it was never really conceptualized. So when Shir and I are talking about teaching across operants, what we're talking about is really going, okay, how do we lead a learner from, visual and, being able to visually, conceptualize that in a very, receptive, expressive understanding of it, and then go into the intraverbal that way. How can you understand something and then be able to turn around and have conversation about it? That is exactly what's meaningful. So really looking at that when we're looking at, programming for our kiddos, not just programming one specific category, but programming across operants so that we are not promoting memorization.
And having been a preschool teacher, like we see how typical kids learn, and learning happens dynamically. So if we were teaching, numbers in preschool, we wouldn't just, ask them what number is it, what number is it, what number is it, but we might count preferred items, and we might paint the numbers, and then we might talk about the numbers, and then we might put characters on the numbers, and we do all these different things because that's how we conceptualize any skill, is by coming at it from different directions. So when we look at our learners, well, you kind of have to know what is developmentally appropriate or what sequences skills go in, but that's not necessarily how we teach them either. So the assessments are not sequential. They're not, always put in order of what's developmentally appropriate. So sometimes you want to make sure that you're looking at it, somewhat sequentially, so that you're not teaching introverbals before they have like a tacting repertoire. They have a lot of receptive language before you teach them introverbals. But at the same time, if they could have both, then we'll teach both. We wouldn't, for example, teach a 4-year-old how to answer why questions, because that wouldn't be developmentally appropriate. But if it's an 8-year-old and we're teaching, receptive WH questions, then we would throw in the introverbals. So there really is, a strong understanding of like what is appropriate to teach, what is functional, what is realistic for their age, and then thinking about what would be an important skill for them and kind of pulling it all together by teaching it across operants.
So let's give an example for a second. So let's think about functions. We seem to always be about teaching FFCs, feature function class. And when we're teaching functions, for instance, we can't just teach that if kids don't have their actions, if they don't know verbs, they don't know what clapping is. We can't say, what do you do with your hands? And they have to say clap because that's memorized. So, we may teach verbs first, or we may teach verbs at the same time we're teaching functions. So we might be able to say, show me clapping. Great, that's clapping. Nice job. Hey, what are you doing? You're clapping. What do you use to clap? Your hands. Awesome. Cool. And you're doing it all at once. And that's what we mean by teaching across operants and really making it meaningful.
And we also always have multiple targets going at a time. So we might be teaching functions with, hands, car, and clothing, and be running those, at the same time, so that also prevents memorization. But we may also choose like a whole category to teach, and then it's random. We're not picking 3 specific targets, but we may talk about, the category of vehicles, and pick any vehicle today to be talking about vehicles. And that way we're not just talking about, a bike and a motorcycle, and then they kind of memorize those and you have to move on to the next set. But really, choosing targets and mixing them up, and then coming back and randomly rotating those targets so that they're not just memorizing the one answer to that one picture.
Shira and I talk a lot about programming for progress, and our next few CEU events are all about programming for progress. And we'll say this over and over again, but by teaching across operants, by teaching meaningful goals, by being able to teach, a few things at once instead of one at a time, and then, getting overgeneralization, we really want to try and teach as quickly as we can, because again, we want to program for progress.
And that comes up with our data collection too. Sometimes we don't need to take trial by trial percentage data. You might be able to put 10 targets on a yes, no data sheet and just like run through them and move on. We don't always need to hold them back, because, for example, if you had 10 trial by trial data for 10 targets, but they really knew 6 of them and just not 4, and you kept repeating the same 10, you're really holding them back, and you could just teach the 4 that they don't know and move on. So there's so many ways that we're going to talk about how we program, the data collection we choose, and the style of writing those programs in a way that really promotes that, strong progress.
We did a 3-hour workshop at ABAI about this, and it was really successful. That Shira and I said, you know what, we should break this down further. So, we did a CEU on just our intake assessment. And with intake, it's either about a student who you don't know and they're coming to you for the first time, or you do know them, but you need to reassess, and, doing that intake/assessment piece of it. And, we've done that. And now that's on our membership as, an asynchronous CEU. And then, the next step of it is, okay, now once I've got this assessment and this intake complete, how do I take that and how do I put it and program plan? So I need to choose some programs, choose some targets, and that's what we're going to be discussing. And then from there, we're going to do another CEU on how to write programs and how to make things meaningful. So make sure that you stay tuned and join us for that.
For more information on individualized ABA programming, click the link on or around this video or in the description to join our next live CEU event, where we'll dive deeper into writing programs that encourage teaching across operants. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos, and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.